Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Podcast Daily. It is Tuesday morning, and that is Bill Landis, and I am Austin Ward, and it's time for America's favorite podcast game. What is on Bill's mind before we go into the Woody Hayes Athletic Center? Could be anything.
I don't think America wants to know the answer to that question.
That's why it's their favorite game, because it could go any number of directions, but we'll try and limit it to what's going on with Ohio State football as they get out there for spring practice number 6. Jim Knowles and Brian Hartline, the coordinators, will update us on whatever Bill wants to ask them, and maybe some other people in the media. We'll see. I proposed or asked 5 of my questions at ohiostate.rivals.com on Monday, as I am want to do every single week. And I'm guessing that Bill's going to have a lot better ones to ask, and that's why I'm waiting to hear what he wants to figure out from the coordinators.
That is a dangerous assumption, my friend. They're probably on par or worse with what you had in mind.
I'll take it.
I'll take it. I don't know. I'm trying to maybe understand the lay of the land at safety right now, which is that's kind of front of mind for me with Jim Knowles, and honestly later in the week too, on Thursday we'll get Perry Liano and Tim Walton and players from their respective position groups after the 7th practice of spring. So it'll carry over to there too, but it kind of goes off what we talked about after the scrimmage on Saturday with seeing just a lot of Josh Proctor and obviously a lot of Lathan Ransom, but also a lot of Cam Martinez. And it's not that I expect by any stretch like the depth chart to be set at this point. In fact, it's probably pretty wide open, I'd imagine, is what Jim Knowles and Perry Eliano would say. But maybe it boils down to like where they think all those guys are individually at the moment, because I would like to get a better feel for how that competition is shaping up, because it feels a little different to me than I at least anticipated coming into this. And that mostly centers on like Sonny Styles, who I think I would have just assumed even if he wasn't out there with the ones on day one of spring ball, I would still project him as a starter. And if someone asked me now, I think I would still project him as a starter or a guy who's going to play starter like reps. But to see Josh Proctor play so much with the ones on Saturday was a little like pump the brakes on that just a bit. So that's like a fairly large question in my mind, just like generally what is going on at that position.
Yeah, I wrote about that. And I've been trying so hard to not be a broken record. Like, is this the year that Josh Proctor takes the next step and becomes a star and a regular, consistent producer for Ohio State? Like, is this the time? Like, it's been going on so long that it's just like asking if the tight ends are going to catch more passes at Ohio State. Like, it's become an offseason tradition, and I really didn't want to do that, but maybe it's still too premature after just 5 practices, because he has been in the system long enough. He's physically mature. We know about all the other attributes that he brings to the position. Maybe that's just a product of it being early in camp, that the veterans are going to have a little bit of an edge and more trust to go out and play when it's good on good. But it could also be the other thing, that the skills are still so appealing to the Ohio State coaching staff that they want Josh Proctor out there. They feel like they need him out there. And I've been trying to think about it from another perspective, like what could be different this year. And he's in a little bit of the same boat as we've talked about the corners and the revolving door of position coaches in different schemes. And Josh Proctor has really had no favors there from consistency with defensive coordinators or a little bit of turnover, leading that safety group. And he may need that more than anybody else. Like, this is what you're going to do. Go do it at a high level. Here it is. Go point A to point B. Like, that's what he's good at. That's his strength, and unleashing that. And maybe some stability is what's going to do that for him. I don't know.
I can see it. I think, like, just broadly, if you were a defensive back who arrived at Ohio State between the years of 2018 and 2021, you weren't done many favors in terms of coaching stability at your position. And they have some carryover this year, and it does feel like both Tim Walton and Perry Eliano have really tight relationships with those guys, and it's probably just the product of it seemed like that from the jump, so I want to give them credit for being able to build relationships, but then obviously that's strengthened by just being here another year, and with the commitment to Tim Walton, it seems like he's going to be here for a while, and If the time ever came to make a similar commitment to Perry Eliano, I think Ohio State would probably do the same because Ryan Day values that continuity. So if that helps bring the best out of a guy like Josh Proctor, or looking down the road, a guy like Kai Stokes, who can have like 3 years of speaking the same language before he's really to take over a starting role, then obviously the defense is better off for that. It's just, I think when you hear that, on one hand, you're like, you know what? I hope that happens. That's great for Josh. He sticks it out, and I hope it clicks for him this year in a way that it hasn't to this point. And then the other side is like, okay, then what does that mean for Sonny Styles? Because people want to see him on the field too. Now, I don't know even if that's the right question to ask, because if you look at it positionally, if Josh is going to be the adjuster, like I don't think that Sonny would also be viewed as like the backup adjuster. I think he's more behind Lathan Ransom, which I guess gets back to like all the moving parts of all this. Like for Jim Knowles, like why was Lathan Ransom at the bandit position so much? Why do you like Josh at the adjuster? What does that mean for Sonny? What does that mean for Kai? Is there a world where, when Jim Knowles is talking about rotating more at linebacker, can you do that at safety moving forward? And all of this is probably jumping the gun a little bit because, as you said at the start, they're only wrapping up the 6th practice of spring on Tuesday. So there's a lot of room to grow and things to happen and ways for this to develop. But it's just, I don't know. For me, it feels a little different than what I expected. But I don't know. For you, does it feel like more or less what you thought this would be?
I think that Saturday was pretty much what I expected it to look like. And I can definitely project out or envision a world where Sonny Styles is in the lineup and Josh Proctor is not, or that Jihad Carter makes up whatever gap may exist and gets in there with Cam Martinez. I can also see how that may not be the case if the experience part plays out. And I think maybe that's a factor that I didn't give enough credence to going into spring. We're like, there were people that left on day one. They're like, oh my gosh, look how great Sonny Styles looks physically. Like he's got to be a starter. And I understand that. And I see that just like everybody else does. But that would be also like putting up a blinder and not looking at what Josh Proctor looks like running around plus 3 years. So they're, I think that I was the one that came into spring. I was like, I don't know how they're going to play all these guys, and I don't know where they fit, and I don't know what their best position is. So I would be lying if I said, yeah, now they've got it figured out, and I had that pegged all along, because I definitely do not. And I still don't know what, if the Indiana game was this week, what it would like, or if this was actually September. If the Indiana game was this week, then that same 3 people that we saw on Saturday would be out there. I think that's probably where they are right now based on experience and comfort and knowledge of the scheme and all those other things. But I do think there's a long way to go in this, and I'm trying to, even when I talk about Josh Proctor, tap the brakes just a little bit, because Perry Elianos and Jim Knowles said 2 things that were different when we asked about it going into camp. And one was that Perry Eliano thought, like, I have a good idea of how it's going to look, and I don't know that there's a lot of experimentation to do. And Jim Knowles was like, yeah, it's spring. We can experiment. And so I was confused by that, and maybe not as confused by what I've seen. And I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I feel.
I think sometimes coaches just like I think they say the thing that they think will make players at least upset. So like even if like the word experiment like might hit Perry Eliano's ears a little bit differently as a guy who has to manage that room than it does for Jim Knowles as a guy who's like the mastermind schemer and is trying to fit all these puzzle pieces together. And I guess like Perry doesn't really think of his players as like pieces in a lab experiment to kind of figure things out. He just wants to think of them as people and guys who came here expecting to play certain positions, and he doesn't want to speak out of turn, I guess. But I think versatility is the name of the game in that room, and I would hope that they embrace what they have there, because they seem to have quite a bit of it. It's just hard for me at the moment to figure out kind of how it all will work out, but they also don't have to have that figured out on March 28th either. So I don't know how pressing it is. It's just like interesting to me that maybe I didn't give like full credence to or have a full appreciation of what exactly they had at their disposal at that position, because now all of a sudden it's like, oh boy, you got 6-7 guys who look like they can all play. what are you going to do? But it's probably a good problem for Ohio State to have. And I'm sure Jim Knowles views it the same way.
Yeah. And I think that more than anything else, it's Josh Proctor that complicates that for Ohio State, because they couldn't have been reasonably expecting him to come back. And even into December, I didn't think that was his plan either. So the fact that he did make that decision, is playing and developing and working with a level of maturity that continues to grow and be important, like, that's what changes everything else. If he wasn't here, I'm pretty sure we'd be looking at Sonny Styles out there with the starters and just be like, well, that era has fully arrived.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a credit to Josh Proctor, not a knock on Sonny Styles, or not a question to the coaching staff about why they can't figure out what to do with them. Like, I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that Sonny is not developing. It doesn't mean that Jim Knowles and Perry Eliano can't or won't play younger guys. It doesn't mean any of that. I think it's important to give some deference to those veterans if they've earned it. And in this case, it seems like Josh Proctor is doing that. Now, if he doesn't, we'll see what we saw against Notre Dame last year, and the next guy will go in and he may not come back and play another, meaningful snap. Like, that's not out of the question. That's up to Josh Proctor. But in March 28th, he's doing the things that they want to see.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I also think, just like from a pure competition standpoint, which is like really the thing that Jim Knowles seemed to harp on a lot the last time we talked to him, this is all good. So there'll be a lot of hand-wringing here and probably elsewhere, and I'm sure like on the board at OhioState.Rivals.com, where some of it's already happening, about like, what does this mean for player X? And I think it's okay in March for the answer to be like, it doesn't mean anything. It means that Ohio State has a lot of really good players at a position that needs to be better than it was last year, and a lot of really good players, in theory, increases the competition and brings out the best in everybody. So I would hope that would happen with that group, and it does. From the feedback we've heard about the secondary as a whole, it does seem like that's been the case so far. So it's not. I don't want people to like be alarmed by things, but it's interesting. But interesting doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing.
Well, it is, Bill, a safety-driven defense. So for you to start there seems pretty normal. You got to put the keys in the ignition, and then you got to drive.
That's right. That's right. Speaking of what drives this defense, so like if Jack Sawyer is going to be good this year, and like what we saw from Kenyatta Jackson was super promising, and I think there's reason to feel similarly about Amari Abor and Caden Curry. And all of a sudden, you're in a world where Ohio State just has like 4 or 5 dudes or close to dudes at defensive end. Can like Jim Knowles just scrap the jack position? Like how important is that to his overall philosophy? Because if it was designed as a way to like level the playing field a little bit at a program, Western Michigan, I believe, is where he was when he first started doing that operates at a little bit of a talent disadvantage. If you are no longer living in that world, do you still have to do it? I think it'd be a very interesting philosophical question to pose to Jim Knowles, who I think is a guy who appreciates philosophical questions.
He does. He would much rather tackle those than being asked to evaluate every single individual on the roster.
Yeah. So I got that. That was like in the back of my head a little bit, which is watching the scrimmage, because they weren't using that position. Jim Knowles has said it's like on the back burner for now. They'll see when Mitchell Melton gets healthy, and I guess when Joshua Mickens gets here, they'll have somebody else who can do that. And I think like long term, as Jim Knowles says, it's still in his plan. But as the roster continues to transition a bit into, I guess, evaluating guys for that position specifically, how comfortable is he living in a world where that position just doesn't exist? And like, can his defense be his defense without it? I don't know. I think it could, but
it could.
I'm not Jim Knowles.
No, I think that'll be. They're clearly, in my mind, preparing for that as a possible reality, because they won't really say that anybody else is going to do this except Mitchell Melton, and he's not going to be available in spring. And they're not having anybody else do it just so they can install and work through, and the other 10 guys know how the jack is going to operate when they're out there. I think that's a lot to put on somebody's plate that's missed, has not played a snap of football in, a year and a half and has been missing from Ohio State practices dating back to last year's spring game. Like that's a tall task to be like, well, he's going to come back in August and put on the pads for the first time, and then we'll install the jack and it'll be ready to go against Indiana. Like that doesn't seem like the most thoughtful installation and execution plan to me. So if you're not gonna consider anybody else, if you're not gonna put CJ Hicks there, if you're not gonna put Gabe Powers or Caden Curry or anybody else this spring at the jack, then there must be some reason for that. And it may be that you think that it's just not a good fit for the personnel that Ohio State's going to have this year. And that's that. I mean, I guess the question is, are you fine with that or not? Which is what you're getting at.
Yeah, it's just like how fundamental of a component is that position for his defense? And I think the answer is pretty fundamental, because he said at the end of his tenure at Oklahoma State, it was basically the base defense. But he's also a smart guy who's getting paid $2 million a year, or just south of that, I guess, to do this job. He should be able to figure out life without it. Like every college football coach's job is to get the most out of whatever talent they have on hand. And if that position is, if it's a fit for Mitchell Melton, which everyone seems to be, like Mitchell Melton is healthy, then sure, let's see it. Let's see what that looks like. Mitchell Melton is going into his 4th season in the program. He's appeared in 1 game. So I really hope it does happen for him, because you hate to see a guy's career get derailed like that by injuries, but how could you possibly bank on it when it just hasn't been able to take shape just yet? So short of that happening, why force it if it doesn't feel right? And if the answer is to give a young guy like CJ Hicks a role, then certainly I'm on board with that, because I've banged that drum pretty loudly. But I think the overall goal needs to be putting the position in the best defense to be successful, whatever that means. And I think last year they kind of got themselves in a bind at times, trying to use that when it just didn't fit people's skill sets, or maybe it was just rushed and there wasn't enough time to really get your feet under you. If you're a guy like Jack Sawyer trying to do that, I think even like Javante Jean-Baptiste was trying to do some of that stuff. So if it's just not natural, then why try to make it so? But I don't know. I'm genuinely now, that probably is what I'll try to ask Jim Knowles, because I'm just interested in how he views that as a fundamental piece of his defense, and whether or not it's something he can kind of pull out and still be what he wants to be.
Fine, I'll ask about Josh Proctor.
Yeah, sorry to put that on your plate. I know you had 10 other players you wanted to ask about before Josh Proctor.
Well, yeah, we don't need,
unless of course someone listens to this and then decides to ask that question before I do. So we'll see what happens.
Entirely possible. That has happened before. All right, let's. What about Brian Hartline?
Yeah, I guess he's going to get asked a lot about calling plays, right? Because it was. I guess I'm curious, how monumental that felt for him, and my guess is probably not all that monumental, because he doesn't seem like a guy who's particularly fazed by those kind of things. But it was Ryan Day was walking around practice with no headset on, which was weird to see. And Brian Hartline was calling the plays and giving the signals to the guys on the sideline. And Ryan Day was just not part of that. And it was whoa, this is different. Maybe they were just putting on a show for us, because that was the only time we were in there last week. And the other 2 practices, Ryan Day had a headset on and was screaming like a maniac. But it did seem like we're in a new world now. So, while I don't think the answer would be particularly compelling, because I don't think Brian Hartline honestly cares all that much or just gives it that much gravity, I think it's worth asking him kind of how he felt about that dynamic, kind of going through it in a game-like setting for the first time.
I think they're going to have to, well, they may not have to give publicly more concrete answers and insight into it. In fact, they probably won't, if I had to guess, but at least internally, I think they're going to have to project a little bit more confidence about what that plan looks like and how it's being executed in the spring, because I don't think you can. The thing that stuck in my mind was Ryan Day said, I don't know that we'll really know until we get into a game and see how it works. They start on the road against a Big Ten opponent. That's not a time to experiment. You don't have a true warm up going to Indiana. Ohio State doesn't lose to Indiana, and they shouldn't by any stretch of the imagination this time either, against this level of roster that the Hoosiers have now. But when you give any Big Ten opponent that much time to prepare, plus Indiana has found ways to make those games a pain in the butt for the Buckeyes numerous times over the last 12 years that I've been covering the team. Like, I don't expect that game to be easy. So you're not going out there and you're not playing a true warm up. And it's going to be more similar to what they had to face 2 years ago as well, when you're factoring in a new quarterback dynamic, a bunch of new pieces, offensively, like, and then if you're adding in on top of that, like, it's going to be the first time we hope that Brian's good at this, but we don't know for sure. Like, I think Saturday was really structured in a way that there wasn't, and maybe Brian Hartline can correct us if we're wrong on that. Like, everything was really laid out. These were the red zones. These are the plays they're going to run. It was third down. These are the plays they're going to run. Like, I don't know how much freedom there was to branch out as a play caller. And it's a lot easier for Ryan Day to say he's not going to be involved in March and April in a scrimmage that's completely structured and agreed upon with his input beforehand. Like, I think they're going to have to try a little bit harder to say, this is what we want to do. And maybe they are doing that and just not talking about it with us. I would assume that that's probably the case, but like, there's not going to be room for them to just go out against Indiana and be like, well, Brian's going to call the first quarter, and if it doesn't work, we'll just put Ryan Day back in charge. Like, that's not going to happen.
No, that certainly can't be the way of things. That is an interesting point you make. Like, I do wonder in those settings how much for like free form there is, or is he just looking at a sheet of 9 plays that he has to, like, he's practicing the mechanisms of calling the play, but he's not actually making the decision about which play to call.
Right.
Maybe that is the way to, because you probably do have to practice calling the plays, right? And I imagine it's a little more complicated than just reading it off a sheet one time and we're good to go. Like, you have to practice the way you're projecting things and like watching the guys giving the signals and make sure they're giving the same thing. So there's probably is a practice element to that, separate from the feel of the game that you need to be a good play caller. And maybe that comes with time too. Or maybe Brian Hartline was rocking and rolling on Saturday and he was doing all of it at once. I have no idea. So maybe if you were willing to answer that would be interesting. I want to know if whoever dialed up that first play from the 50-yard line, double move touchdown to Jaden Ballard, really good play call. One play scoring drives. Everybody loves those. So does Brian Hartline want to take credit for that? Was that Ryan Day? Like, where did that come from? Because that was dynamite. I want to see more of that.
Yeah, who did that one? Yeah, I think there's an element to this. A long time ago, I wrote a story just about the mechanics for an offensive coordinator, getting in a play, because you think about it, like, everyone has sat down and played Madden, and you have a play clock, but it's more time than you need, and you're scrolling through formations. Like, that's not the way that it works in real life, where you're sitting there in a booth, the play clock is rolling. You want to have it in by 25 seconds into the play clock. You have to leave time for adjustments. Ohio State does look at me to the sideline a lot and check with me stuff. Like, you have to know what the next play call is in advance, and then you also have to have practiced saying the words, because a lot of the formations and route concepts and identification tools that Ohio State uses to get plays called, like, they don't all roll off the tongue very easily.
Yeah,
you got number combinations and different words and left, right, and this and that and the other. Like, yeah, I've seen them, on the screen. Like, it takes you a couple seconds to even say what it is. So there is an element of that I think, that Brian Hartline, yeah, the combination of those two would be really great. I know that he got that part, like getting the play call into a headset and communicated to the quarterback so they can signal it. Like, he did that, and he's going to have more time to do that. But it's the next step. Like, that's just the basic fundamentals. That's not the creativity. That's not the thinking ahead. That's not the chess game. Like, I don't know that we've saw what that would look like for him on Saturday, or how much opportunity there will even be for him to do that in March and April.
That does make me wonder, like, how much mystery is there to this? Like, is going into a scrimmage Saturday against Jim Knowles' defense at all like preparing for Indiana's defense in September, in the sense that you don't know what they're going to call? Like, you have their film and you have the book on them and you know what they like to call, but you don't know when they're going to call it. Is it different when you're scrimmaging against your own team, where like, what Jim Knowles wants to work on that day, so he's going to call one of these 3 things, and then it's a little easier? Or is the randomness that comes with a normal game day Saturdays that somehow baked into a practice. That actually kind of fascinates me. I don't know if that is even possible. I guess it's possible, but do people? I don't know if that's like the best work for the offense or the defense either, to just kind of like leave it up to chance like that. I think you would want it more structured if you're coaching your own players through stuff. So
I bet
yeah,
Jim Knowles. I bet he won't blitz as much as Indiana.
Oh yeah, well, we were expecting Indiana blitz like 1,000,000% of the time 2 years ago, and then not as much last year. And last year did not go very well for them. So maybe they'll go back. They also now they have Matt Guerrieri calling the shots on defense now. They have an Ohio State spy on their defensive coaching staff. So maybe he's got some knowledge of the inner workings of the Ohio State system that'll help Indiana in that game. Who knows?
He should. He's got a year of scheming. Yeah, I'm sure they schemed a lot against it in practice. Never mind. Forget I even brought it up. All right, anything else on your mind on the offensive side?
Like specifics on Jaden Ballard and just what Brian Hartline thinks of his growth. I think he's a guy that we have talked about a lot coming out of that scrimmage. I know other people have as well. He's got the buzz right now, and I suppose someone was going to get it with Marvin sort of being held out of stuff just for precautionary reasons and because he's awesome, and then Emeka and Julian being out for injury reasons this spring. Someone was going to grab the attention, I guess, at that position. And it does seem like Jaden Ballard, at least in the early going, has done it. Now that's like our opinion. I wonder if Brian Hartline's opinion is anywhere similar to ours, because it's kind of sounded like Ryan Day's was. Talking to him after practice, like he sounded like he's been pretty pleased with what Jaden's done so far this spring. But Brian Hartline is like a pretty honest and shrewd evaluator when we ask him those kind of things. So whatever he says about Jaden, I would take pretty seriously, and if it's good, like that means a lot.
I would wager some units on the fact that Brian Hartline will say there was something wrong with the route on the double move for the touchdown. I don't know what it'll be, but something wasn't right. And then they looked at it, and it wasn't perfect, and they're going to work on it. The shin angle was wrong. The release wasn't great. He took two steps too many before the first move. I don't know. I'm just going to wager that that's what we'll hear. We only focused on the catch and that the move worked. But boy, there is so much more that he's got to do. You guys don't even know what you're talking about. That's my word.
Yeah. That's a safe bet. He is a perfectionist, but I also, when he does stuff like that, I almost take it partly as an admission of like, yeah, he's good. Stop talking about it. So We'll see if that's what he says.
Yeah. We call that Garrett Wilson-itis.
Yeah. Listen, if you're going to have an itis, I think Garrett Wilson-itis is a pretty good one.
It's a good one to catch. That's now the second. Monday's Daily, I compared him to Jameson Williams, and today Garrett Wilson. So we're clearly going overboard with 5 practices for Jaden Ballard, but
we sure
are. At least we've, I think there is something to be said for that, because he is making the most of it, as you said. Like, somebody had to do it, and a lot of the focus going into spring camp was on last year's class, the second-year receivers. Could they do it, or how real was the push going to be from the first-year guys, which, by the way, looks pretty significant. Mm-hmm. From Carnell Tate and Bryson Rogers and Noah Rogers. Those guys have some skills, and then Brandon Ennis, by the way, is just out there watching and chomping at the bit to get out there. But the fact that, so I know that front of mind for me was not necessarily Jaden Ballard making that move. So the fact that he has, I think that does deserve to be called out and credited, because it takes a lot of hard work to even win a rep in an Ohio State practice. That's not hyperbole. That's a real thing.
Yeah. And especially if he's going to be like the 14th pick in the draft that you're projecting him to be. So we got to ask about him now.
Yeah. I don't remember saying that, but I say a lot of things. We do a lot of shows, and hopefully you enjoy all of that content. There will be more for your Tuesday with those coordinators talking. We will attempt, as we always do, to have streaming coverage of those press conferences. I believe those will be in the team room, which should allow for that. We'll have some snap judgments to react to as well. And if you noticed, we were not and Roosters for the live show in the Horseshoe Lounge on Monday. We will be doing that later on Tuesday afternoon. So thank you for your patience on that. It'll be Appetizer Tuesday. We'll dig into that and everything else going on with Ohio State spring ball as the day progresses. Thanks for joining us on the podcast daily to get your Tuesday started right. For Bill, I'm Austin. We will talk to you later.